So, in light of all of these mandatory vaccinations, as well as the various chemicals in the water supply, I think it's safe to say that more and more children are becoming autistic. Um, Not to say that that's a bad thing. I personally am autistic, so it's fine. But there were times when I was growing up when I thought, things would be so much easier for me if I were just a woman. If I were an autistic woman, I wouldn't have to deal with the expectations that come with being male in the place that I lived, which was the rural South, where gender roles are extremely stereotypical and socially enforced because it's a collectivistic sort of culture. Um, that was my experience, and I felt as though women were more uniquely human. They were privileged in the sense that they were actually allowed to have the emotions of closeness, compassion, warmth, and I saw them as having something I did not because of that, that they were allowed to express things that I was not. And in that sense, I saw them as more free. But of course, the grass is always greener on the other side with these things. Um, I was not perceiving all of the oppression that they were experiencing at the same time that they were able to express those things and openly feel those things. Um, and so it's it's sort of a difficult topic to to pick apart, but um, I do think I do think there is an extent to which, at least in that type of culture, that women have some level of privilege. Of course, it comes with losing certain things at the same time. But from the perspective of an autistic and therefore probably pretty sensitive male kid, um, women have got it easy. And so, I saw this kind of stuff and I thought, wow, if I was a woman, I wouldn't be treated like shit for having emotions. Um, and I think this is one of the ways where autistic children are like oftentimes these days convinced that they're trans because if your experience with the world is just inherently alienating, you feel alienated from your body, you feel alienated from yourself um, because of the degree of sensitivity you have to things like overstimulation. Um, when like every minor occurrence in one's body is felt in this intense fashion. Um, I was just out in the heat yesterday, and I certainly felt that. It affected, my ability to think because I became overstimulated. Um, this is an experience with the world that's so different from neurotypicals that it creates this situation where you're also going to be alienated from others because they, can't possibly begin to figure out how to accommodate you. And I think there are certain people, it's not a lot, but there are certain people these days who probably grew up in the kind of environments I grew up in, where men and women are very different from one another. And they see all this transgender stuff and they're like, okay, maybe this is the cure. Maybe this is the thing that's gonna cure my autism or at least alleviate some of the problems associated with it. Um, and I think that's why most of the like actual detransitioners, not just people who have grifted, have come out as autistic because some of them just are autistic. But also, I don't think it's necessarily bad to take HRT into transition if you don't have dysphoria or if you don't have a particularly well-defined sense of your own gender. I do have a well-defined sense of my own gender, and I always have. I've always wanted to be seen as male. Um, I simply wanted to be accepted and loved as a male with feminine attributes and as myself. And I used to believe that that wasn't possible in the world. And thankfully, I was wrong. But when you have these wrong headed notions about yourself, I think it is easy to take exceedingly drastic measures, especially if you care very little about yourself, as I did. Um, but that's my story. This is a case study in myself that I'm presenting here. I think for other people whose identity is more malleable, who don't have a well-defined sense of gender that they want to express to others and be seen for and accepted for, they can just morph themselves into whatever gender they want or whatever identity they want. I think certain people out there who are part of this dogmatically anti-essentialist crowd, part of the anti-essentialist religion, um, these people have misconstrued some of my statements. It isn't so much a matter that I think everyone has a well-defined sense of gender and that, some people are in an absolute sense trans and others are not, and that there is no in between whatsoever. It's more so that I think some people have an absolute sense of their gender expression that, cannot change, will not change, and that it's just that way, um, much in the same way that people's personalities solidify and then they're just that way. And then there are other people who are more malleable and, have a more ill-defined sense of identity, and they can, do fine in a number of different bodies or states and so on. It's just different depending on the individual. Um, and so all of this is to say that I think there are lots of autistic people who have this kind of, you know, ill-defined identity and means by which they express themselves, that they are malleable and adaptable, at least in this fashion. And maybe they would benefit from some kind of gender transition. Like maybe amongst their peers, they would become more popular or more successful. Um, Maybe a more feminine way of expressing oneself is better suited toward to them. And I think that shouldn't be something, thrown away or not looked at. I think that's something worth looking at. Um, and yeah, I mean, the amount of autistic people I see transitioning now, I don't consider it worrying. Like, a lot of people have this strange, concern trolling they do about autists transitioning. I know that guy, Mr. Girl, is a big proponent of this. Um, and on one level, I can understand it. Like, you don't want, um, you know, possibly permanent or irreparable changes to occur that you don't actually want, that you find out you don't actually want. But also, most of the effects of HRT are completely reversible. Like, I was on it for literally over a year, and it's not apparent in any way that I was. Like, I was on it, and then everything just reversed. Um, with the exception of some fertility stuff, but people shouldn't be having kids in the first place. Um, so if you really care about that, maybe you should reassess why you would want to put another life in the world. Um, but I mean, beyond that, like, who cares? You know, it's your body, your choice. If it helps you, it helps you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You sometimes you have to experiment with these things to find out. I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think that should necessarily be discouraged, but to the extent that like it would cause more psychogenic pain to have these permanent changes in people who might not want them. Like, yeah, I mean that's something to think about, but it doesn't really matter. Like, this is the weird thing to me about this whole discussion is like we're talking about other people's bodies and minds as though it's like a debate. Like it as if it's debatable to point out the mere existence of morphological freedom. Like, no, your morphological freedom is inherent, regardless of what the law says, regardless of what society says, regardless of what your religious institution says. You are born in the world with a body that is your sole possession, that you can do whatever you want to, whatever you want with. And that is your right. It is nobody's business to tell you what to do with your body. If the law restricts what you can do with your body, you skirt around the law. You break the law. Because that law is wrong. It's morally wrong. And so I do not believe that this right that we have after we're born ought to be a subject of debate. But it is because there are still people out there who can't wake up to the fact that this is your right. And for as long as those people exist, basic things like bodily autonomy are going to be up for debate. But the discussion doesn't belong to them. It is not their discussion. Because once again, bodily autonomy is not a matter of debate. It's a fact. It's a reality that we're all going to experience, whether these people like it or not. And who cares? I think maybe these folks should take some advice that I often got from my teachers in school, which is if someone is bothering you or asking questions, you say a few simple words: mind your own business. That's the end of the discussion right there. If someone is trying to debate your existence, you just say mind your own business. And that's it.